I saw a documentary recently called Won't You Be My Neighbor? This was a movie about Fred Rogers, the host and creator of the children's television show Won't You Be My Neighbor that aired from 1968 all the way until the year 2001. Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, hosts the entire time. Now, this documentary, which was directed by Morgan Neville, um, basically it tried to answer the question. In my opinion, this is what it set out to do, was to tell you exactly who Fred Rogers is. It was about him specifically, not really about the show itself or about children's television or any of that. It was about Fred Rogers. So the question it tried to answer was, or the question that's asked about Fred Rogers a lot, rather, is this man really who he seems to be? We live in a cynical culture, and Fred Rogers, on the surface, seemed like a very. He seemed like he was acting. He seemed like he was putting on a show. He seemed like he was too good to be true, a phrase you hear a lot. And what this documentary attempted to do was tell you no, Fred Rogers was the man he seemed to be. He was an honest, straightforward teacher, somebody who loved you and loved you just the way you were. The documentary was beautiful. It was moving. It was touching. It was informational. It was educational. And it did something that I think documentaries always should do. I guess maybe not should do, but what I like them to do is to teach you something larger about culture by the way it looks at one part of that culture. So, for example, there was a documentary I watched a couple years ago called Euro Dreams of Sushi, and it's about this he was in his 80s or 90s at the time, a sushi master, has this restaurant in Tokyo, seats 12 people, it costs $100 to go there. He makes what you eat and you eat that. You don't get to decide. But it teaches you about Japanese culture as a whole through this man. Through how he runs his restaurant, through his family dynamic, through how, he gets fish in the morning. It was great. And not to talk too much about that, but Won't You Be My Neighbor did something similar. By telling you about this guy, Fred Rogers, you learned about the television industry of the 60s. You learned about race relations. You learned about sexual orientation and how it was perceived. You learned about children's education, about childhood development in small ways, sure, with a lot of them, but all these things were addressed simply by how Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, decided to create his show. So, like Mr. Rogers, the documentary was slow moving. It never threw a whole lot of information at you at a time. It worked a lot through stories by telling you a story that, from the set or something like that, it told you about Mr. Rogers himself, something that he would do on the show, rather than just tell kids about a topic. Like, educationally, he would tell a story about that topic. He would go into the land of make-believe, and a story would play out that would kind of parallel real life. And you would learn about that. Children watching it would learn about it that way. And I think the documentary did something similar. A lot of the people interviewed were people from the set, from the behind the scenes, people who helped create the show. His wife was a big part of it. There were a couple celebrities on there, but it was mostly names you wouldn't really know off the bat. I don't really have much bad to say about this. Of course, it is a documentary, and it's hard to really... You can't really critique it like you can Jurassic World, because as long as it's telling the truth, to a certain extent, a documentary has done its job. And, of course, things are subjective, but I believe that this documentary did a very good job. It presented it in a way that was fun, that was educational, that was, like I said, emotional. There were times when I was tearing up, especially toward the end, and I don't feel like it was trying to do that disingenuously, disingenuous manner. There we go, got the word out there. It basically just told you who this man was and how he impacted the world. And that was enough to kind of, get the heart moving a little bit. So, I would highly recommend going and watching this movie. If you can find a showing. We had to drive all the way across town, and this is Portland. There's a lot of theaters here. And it's been out for a while now. We had to drive all the way across town. So if you can find a showing nearby, go see it in theaters. Give money to this movie. This is the kind of movie we need to be in the big theaters. And if you can't find it, make sure you watch it on, Netflix when it's on there, or Amazon, or whatever way. Just watch this movie. You won't regret it. Bye, guys.